Hello, everyone. My name is Nathan Bird, founder of the Acquisition IQ podcast, as well as the Acquisition IQ Network and AquaCon Acquisition Conference coming to Salt Lake City on September 3rd. We're sitting here with Owen Power. He is the founder and CEO of the Power Brands. So underneath the Power Brands, you have Power Capital, Power CFO, and Power M&A. So, and that's exactly what we're going to be touching on today is Owen's experience within the M&A space, as well as from a financial perspective, what you see has been good during the transactions that you have been through, because you've also been a part of your own transactions on the M&A part. So, again, thank you so much for joining us. I know you're a busy man, and we just want to say thank you to be on the podcast today.
Oh, it's awesome to be here, Nathan. I really appreciate the invite, and I'm excited to spend a few minutes chatting with you.
You said earlier on during our conversation offline that you'd been in the space of finance for 35, 40 years, pretty much your entire career.
Right.
What was one motivating factor to continue to join or go down that path?
Well, maybe the origin story could be a little interesting.
Yeah.
As a junior in high school, I participated in a thing called Junior Achievement. I think they have it here in the States. I'm from South Africa, as you know. And so we had it there. And we formed this little company, sponsored by another company, to sort of mentor us and help us grow. But it was a 12-week thing. We had shares. We had to decide on a product we could build in that short time that we met each week. It was T-shirts that we did, and I was elected as the financial director or the CFO of this little company. And that experience then went, that's what I want to do with the rest of my life. I wanted to be an architect before that. And so that was the moment I said, I want to be a financial director or a CFO of a company in my future career. And so that's where I ended up. Went and did the chartered accounting designation in South Africa, as registered auditor, worked in that public accounting space before starting up my own business or my own practice as a chartered accountant. And that's when I really got into helping and working with small business owners grow and develop their businesses, and even had a couple that we ended up helping to sell to somebody else. So that really got my juices going for the whole M&A space.
Yeah, I could imagine. Yeah, I like that, how earlier on in someone's career or life, there can be motivating factors that will push them in certain directions. It's interesting, and we'll get into the tactics and various things. Don't worry about it, guys. But, as a second grader, I can remember me talking with my grandfather about just wanting to be a businessman. That's all I wanted to do. I would dress up. I had a briefcase that I took to school in second grade, just knowing that I just wanted to do business, and here we are, running the conference and being, obviously sitting down with people like yourself that have so much experience that we want to learn from. So let's dive into it. This podcast is really all about helping the viewer understand the complexities that go through a transaction. And I think you'll be able to shed some light and insight as to the financial side of everything, because within a transaction, there are so many different things. As you know, there's the due diligence process, there's the negotiation, so there's the psychology of such, there's the team members, there's a plethora of things that you've got to do. But from a financial side, let's start to dive into a scenario. Let's start with one exit that you had experienced, and then from a financial side, we can go into that, and then we'll go into some of the due diligences that you've had to go through as a financial professional.
Yeah. So I was the CFO of a manufacturing company, and this was actually after a smaller exit that I'd just done. I was looking for a new opportunity and got introduced to this manufacturing company. Little did I know at the time that they were actually in a little bit of financial distress. The owner didn't even know it because the controller had been, I'm careful to say manipulating the books, but he wasn't sharing the full big picture. And so when I joined on as the CFO, I had to then share the bad news that, well, this profit that was being reported for this prior financial year was actually a loss, and we're going to have to turn this thing around. So that was a little scary for me up front, because that's not what I initially signed up for. Fast forward, we did a whole bunch of things, and we can share some of those stories too, but we did a whole bunch of things to really turn that company around and then put it on a big growth trajectory. And at that point, we then said, well, maybe the founder wants to just take some chips off the table and let's go to market. And so we went through a whole sort of 12-month process of identifying potential partners and eventually getting LOIs, due diligence, going through the actual sale and close. One of the things that I realized through that process for me, that while I was initially kind of focused on the financial aspect of it, as we were doing the sort of interviews with potential partners, the fact that I had been the de facto general manager of that company as well over time, because I was then formally appointed president and CFO during this course, is that I started to see a lot of the transaction details, not just from a financial point of view, but also from an operational point of view. And ultimately that led to me being appointed CEO of that company after the transaction took place. And my learning experience from that is that there can be a tendency to go into transactions financial orientated, when in fact it's very important to make sure that the finances and the operational pieces are married well and truly together, and that those make sense in any kind of deal that you're doing.
That's extremely good. I think that, as you know, people can get more financially incentivized as opposed to organizationally incentivized, like you just said.
Right.
You've got people that maybe see an opportunity and they'll overlook certain areas.
Yeah.
What were some of the areas that were overlooked to create that company into financial distress, and how did you overcome? So maybe 2 things that you implemented that actually helped get you back on track.
One of the key things was sound financial reporting. They had all the elements in place. They had this dashboard of charts and ratios and all sorts of things, which was incredible. It was very complex. It was really hard to read. And so simplification there was kind of key. But the numbers were saying we're declining in margins, and the numbers were saying we're declining in revenues. But nobody could interpret that. Nobody could actually say this is the reason why things were the case. And so as I started to dive into it, I had to then dig for and get to understand what is going on here. One of the reasons for the margin decline is that price increases weren't being passed along to customers on a regular cadence, once a year or every other year or whatever that needed to be. And so costs were continuously increasing in the company. And the approach to try and address that was to try and cut costs where possible. And so there were a number of things that were happening that was really retarding the growth of the company, because costs were being cut when really more investment should have been made in things moving forward.
Well, and then also just a slight increase of the pricing.
Right.
And
part of the issue there is that there was issues fundamental inside of the accounting for cost of sales, which meant that the sales reps are going to market with what they believe to be the gross margin on the sale, when in fact the gross margin was actually significantly less. So really the key there is getting the right numbers in front of the sales team to understand exactly what it is that we're making or not making on any particular deal.
That's so good.
And so providing them with that data, it just naturally changed their perspective as they went out to market, and they were starting to quote better because they knew, what was more appropriate.
As someone who's a sales man and who has gone through sales a lot, I'll just sell whatever is in front of me.
Right.
Like, if it's a number, I'll create the value, and we'll obviously use the art of persuasion to create whatever is needed.
Right.
But it's interesting because from your perspective, you've got to provide all of your sales teams and everyone with the right funding, strategy and every intricate detail, which I think some people are missing because they're missing the communication between the front line and the back.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it sounds like that's what happened with this organization.
And a good sort of added background to that is that once we had the right margins on the table for the sales team, they could go out and sell at an appropriate price. But in a manufacturing environment, if your production process is not working sufficiently, it doesn't matter what you sell at, you can still make a loss on those transactions. And I had the production manager, as we were going through what his KPIs were for his team, one of the things I realized was they weren't really looking at a utilization number. And when we explored that, I was finding utilization rates in the 60s and 70% range. And he was kind of happy with that. And I said, that's just not enough. We need to be 85+%. And as I walked him through how that worked and then worked with him to be able to properly track that each month with each employee that was in the production team and started to identify who was being fully utilized and not, we started to see profits go up. Because as we got people more fully utilized, we weren't having this overhead burdening the margin. Now, in fact, we were starting to get more productivity in, more product out the door, and our profits then increased naturally. So those two things, getting the right numbers in front of the sales team and getting the right KPI metrics inside of production so that we could manage the people better, turned that company around.
I feel like there's so many lessons to be learned there. Even if you think your company is doing well, just understanding the systems that you've created. And then also, even right now, for example, with different percentages that are increasing on the different tariffs that are being issued, and then understanding, that's just current, and while we're shooting this podcast, it's 2025, March or April 2025. But anyway, this is really good. So let's move into, again, some of the areas of due diligence through the process of looking at buying a company, and then from a financial perspective, what you're looking for, because it sounds like you've gone through the turnaround. So you, in essence, created a successful company.
Right.
But actually, let's talk about the exit, because you guys exited that company.
Yes.
Let's touch on that first, and then we'll go into the buy side due diligence.
The driver there was very much the founder had reached a point where he thought now's probably a good time to really, capture some of this value that we'd built up in this company, because we went from, we more than doubled, just about doubled the revenue growth, and we went from a loss to multi 6-7 digit profitability. So it was well primed, kind of for that. But one of the things that helped a lot as we went through the due diligence process is that we had really cleaned up the accounting to the point where everything was pretty rock solid. We could explain the numbers. We could explain why there was a trend change, because we knew we had collected that data and we had been through it. Things reconciled. We could produce financial statements quickly. So many times as I've worked with clients over the years, they struggle to get financials out a month or more, beyond the month end. We could do it within a week. And when you can do that, you can respond quickly to the requests that come, from anybody that's doing due diligence with the company. And what that does is it adds a very high level of confidence in the potential buyer, as to, the numbers seem to be good. They're still going to go through and they're going to beat them to death, and they're going to come back with really wild questions and stuff. But the fact that they have that underlying confidence in the numbers, makes a very big difference, especially when you start to get to the back end and now you're trying to negotiate some of the details. We ended up getting a 75% premium of what the founder originally was hoping he would get from the sale of the business. And that had a lot to do with the numbers were good, we could produce reports quickly, and there was nothing that then came out of due diligence that suggested otherwise, other than that these are good numbers.
That's like, you guys were like the dream acquisition, basically.
I think so.
Must have been from you, right? The CFO. but also you were the CEO, having CFO experience, which that's a unicorn, basically.
Right.
Well, I've actually seen that before. You've got the CFO that then goes into the CEO position, but I'm sure that's just really helpful for a company.
You're seeing that a lot more. I mean, even at the public company level, right? You're seeing CEOs being appointed, at CFOs being appointed as the CEOs, and that's got a lot to do with there's been a shift from the CFO is just the finance guy in the back office doing the spreadsheets. The CFO is a very real partner to the CEO in planning out the strategy of the business and moving them forward. Strategy is one thing. Knowing how that's going to impact the finances and how much money you need to implement the strategy is another. And so it's very important to have those two. CEO is the visionary, and the CFO has got to be the integrator into this.
Yeah, we're seeing that. So you guys, you're prepping for exit, and for everyone out there, I'd like to go through just maybe some best practices that it sounded like, of course, the access to the financial statements were extremely helpful in the valuation of the company, because it's a 75%, you said, an increase on what your founder had thought he was going to have. But can you share with us some any more best practices within the company to get ready for a sale?
I think it does start with having a very clear vision of where you want the company to go to, right? I mean, one of the questions that you deal with as a consultant in working with clients that potentially want to do an exit is why? Why do you want to do that? If this business is doing so well, why would you want to sell it off? Why would you give some of it away? Why would you give up that future opportunity moving forward? And I mean, there's diverse reasons, but one of the reasons is that companies get to a point where they really cannot go much further. It's almost like a glass ceiling, right? They have the infrastructure that they have, and it's working really well for a company of that size. But the moment you want to go to another level, suddenly the structure of the company doesn't quite work. And then there's usually got to be some kind of investment in the infrastructure, whether it's equipment or people, that needs to take it to that next place, kind of go beyond where it's at. And so if, as the founder or the executive team, don't have a clear vision of where the company is going to go to, it's going to be very hard to articulate that to any kind of buyer and justify any kind of valuation, it's associated with that. And so having a very clear vision and strategy, is vital. But then the backup plan the backup to that is we have the numbers, and this is what we believe will move us in this direction. And so we need X, Y, and Z to do, these three things to be able to be successful in that route. And for us, we saw an opportunity in the space where it required new equipment, and for us to venture into a new product category that we hadn't done before, and that required significant investment. So selling off to private equity then provided some of that cash, that new investment had come in for us to move into that market. Otherwise, we would have started to get left behind. The rest of the market would have moved forward, and we would have just been stuck.
That's good insight. Yeah, because there's so many different ways you could do it. You could sell it off, like you can cut the business up into specific parts. And for those of you out there too, I mean, you don't have to sell your whole business. Like what you were just saying, it's either maybe you're raising a debt round, or maybe you're, just carving out an 80% sell off, and then you still continue to have 20, but yet that additional capital just allowed you to expedite the complete, expansion. Because sometimes you have business owners that want so much to grip, they want so much control, whereas you could increase the overall company to provide more value back to you, but yet you have a smaller amount of equity in the company, but yet that one small percentage is a significant amount of return to you.
Right.
But you have to be, like you're saying, you've got to really understand your why a lot more than just, I guess, when you're in a position of selling, you've got to understand your why a little bit deeper.
Right.
Hmm.
One of the things that
It's good.
I've kind of considered as I've consulted with clients is sometimes maybe selling is not necessarily the way to go either. Sometimes it makes sense actually to acquire another business and potentially a competitor, to be able to take it to that next level, because the two individual companies on their own, might be stuck in a ceiling. But if you were to combine them, there might be some synergies there that can take you to another level. So sometimes I think founders kind of rush to the sale and with potential exit, rather than maybe thinking about, well, what if I went on a little M&A trip myself, bought up some of my competitors or other smaller companies and built something a little bit bigger, used the economies of scale there to kind of move the company forward. And that potentially could increase valuation significantly in the long run.
Yeah, I just read the other day an individual had posted on a LinkedIn site. I can't remember the numbers, but it was in essence a competitor of this company. They knew each other as being competitors in the industry, but yet they still had a good relationship.
Right.
One tried to buy the other. They said no. Came back, 2 years later. One wanted to buy the other. No. But yet they still had this relationship, and it wasn't like, don't talk to me, I'm your competitor.
Yeah.
So then they ended up getting back. They joined forces, created a joint venture. Then they sold the company for over $400 million.
Right.
And it was like they both cashed out.
Right.
And they did really well for themselves.
Right.
And it was just another use case, like you just said. So,
Right.
Another word of advice for you guys, if you're in the same industry with somebody, and we just had a speaker at our conference, he's gone through 79 different acquisitions. Their company is now valued at over $2 billion.
Wow.
And they're taking their company to $5 billion. He has 17 different transactions in the pipeline right now. But what he was saying is it's a wonderful opportunity if you do have competitors in the space to continue to build relationships, you know what I mean? And don't have that there's a competition aspect of it, but there's also an abundance mindset,
And I believe a lot into that. I mean, as I've ventured out into being a fractional CFO and consulting to clients myself, I've taken that very much abundance mentality. If I can't carve out a small niche and create value and wealth for my family over a period of time, then I probably shouldn't be doing that.
Yes,
because the market is big enough to be able to support new entrants in. You've just got to be good at what you do and provide lasting value to those that you do give it to.
Yeah. Let's talk about that M&A trip. I enjoyed what you said there. I think it's we've got a bunch of business owners out there that are wanting to learn that growth through acquisition, and some of it sounds trendy, but there's also a lot of value to it, but there's also a lot of pitfalls that one could make. So let's talk a little bit about how a M&A roll-up strategy works, and how it could be beneficial, but then also maybe some not red flags, but ways that you can mitigate, that acquisition.
Yeah, I've been on both sides, and so it's a lot of that was a learning experience too. You go into a potential transaction with kind of one view or one thought in mind, and then as you go through it, you sometimes tend to digress a little bit, and maybe that's for a good thing because you recognize there's another good reason why. But then sometimes you also just identify why this is not a good reason why. But being clear about what your end objective is really critical. Otherwise, you can end up in a deal that just doesn't actually make sense for you. When you're acquiring a smaller business, it's not necessarily to take out your competitor because they're smaller than you. So in theory, you should be well positioned. But what are the things that are going to make that combined entity better than what it was before? And as I worked with those potential acquisitions that we were going to make, and kind of try to put myself, because it was fairly new for me, as the seller, kind of put myself into their shoes. What were they going through? One of the things that really popped out strongly, and we're talking now, small businesses, founder-owned and managed businesses, is that one of the roadblocks for founders wanting to sell is that this is their baby. This is the thing that they developed. They started from scratch, grew themselves. They've had family members in there working. It's been their whole life. And now suddenly the idea of actually selling it, even though that's something that they want to do and they can see the benefits of it, it's really becomes an emotional thing as well. And I think, if you go on this M&A trip, you're going to do growth through acquisition. If you fail to remember that there's a very big emotional component, for the seller as you go through this process, you can potentially lose the deal because you kind of fail to meet that emotional need of that individual. For some of them, it's going to be, what's going to happen to my employees? What's going to happen to these long-term people that have really helped me? But for some, what is going to happen to my name, to my legacy beyond this? One of the transactions I was involved with, the further complication is that it was the second generation that was now running the business. And so it was dad's legacy, that we're concerned about, where that was going to go. And if you ignore that, then you kind of lose them through the process, and they see the numbers, they see the money, that's good. But if they don't feel heard or feel a sense of that their legacy is going to be enhanced because of this, you'll lose them and fall away. And they'll end up with one of your competitors because the competitor saw that. And then suddenly you're behind now because your competitor has now snapped up that potential deal that you missed out on.
That's really good insight, as far as what people are going through, during a transaction. And, I believe that there's so many things we've touched on. It's basically establishing your why and understanding some best practices as one who's wanting to potentially acquire companies. In addition, making sure that you can create the most value within a company based on proper accounting principles, which you're seeing, and of course you've been in the finance industry for over 40 years plus, and both from an operational standpoint, as a CEO as well. So you're seeing so many scenarios, and then now as a consultant with your own company. So share with us what you're working on now, and maybe some of these use cases where you're coming in or people are seeking you out to maybe do that turnaround or create value, not overnight per se, but how are you able to really turn around a company? And then for those out there that are maybe going through similar issues, maybe we can help solve their problems.
Yeah. The popular term these days is fractional CFO. When people ask me, what is it that I do? My response is that I help, owners of businesses solve the problems that are preventing them from meeting or exceeding their goals in life. Because everybody has that. They run a business for a reason. Otherwise, they could just get a paycheck from somewhere else. They have an objective, a longer-term objective that wants to be in place. But life throws problems at us all the time. And so there's always some kind of issue that kind of holds back the business owner as they're trying to grow and develop. And one of those things is just really understanding the financial aspect of the business. Probably the most common thing I learn as I meet with prospective clients is that they literally run the business with one key performance indicator in mind: how much cash is in the bank account. And based on that, they're making a lot of decisions moving forward. But those of us in the industry know that what your P&L statement says is your net income doesn't mean that's what is the number in your bank account. Those two things can be very, very different. And understanding that is kind of key to making the right business decisions moving forward. And so that's my primary thing that I get involved with, is coming in and providing those that CFO level strategic thinking, helping to interpret those financial statements in a way that really converts into actionable data, for the business owner to be able to move forward. The fact that I've had CEO experience means that I'm able to almost be like a mentor to the business owner to help guide him or her through, what it takes to actually run this business. And this human capital issue that you have going on right now, these two employees are fighting, or this one is not performing, while that affects your numbers, it's a very different thing to understand how to manage that process. So kind of managing the company is the added spice that I can throw in with the consulting that I do. It's not just about, here's your P&L and balance sheet, but this is how this translates into actionable items, and these are some of the things we need to think about operationally to be able to execute and make this work. And through that process, I help go through and find capital, whether it's raising debt finance or equity finance. Maybe the company does want to go and do an exit or do an acquisition themselves. I get involved with that. So I take my life's experiences and bundle that up into that one thing. Certainly the biggest challenge that I found when I was CFO for a company that we exited out of is that having good, solid financial statements on the table to be able to talk to as a starting point. And so often many of the engagements I get involved in start with, let's get the books cleaned up, and then we can be able to move forward. We do a financial health check up front, so we get a sense of where the company is, even though the numbers we know are not exactly right, but we have a sense that they're directionally right. We at least do that, and then that becomes the foundation for us to set objectives and key results or other goal-setting strategy, and as to where do we want to go, and how, if we're going to get there, what numbers are going to get us there, and how do we take this number from 2.1 to a 2.5, whatever the ratio happens to be.
Financial forecasting.
Yeah.
And then having an understanding of the importance of not just looking at your bank account and then making decisions off of that. I think I've been there before. I think we all have, to be a wise businessman or woman out there, it's just, being proactive. And I was just on a different podcast about this, and it was all about, within this space of M&A and business, we're hearing time and time again, people are talking about increased evaluation. But increased evaluation becomes this preventative, long-term planning systems that are placed into, efficient systems that are placed into an organization that will then give you the results you're looking for,
Right.
which is an increased evaluation. And that's what we're seeing, right? So systems, and then, it's just an interesting concept, because people, they want an increased valuation without maybe doing some of the preparation that is in long-term preparation up front,
Right.
And I'm sure that's probably what you've seen multiple times.
Yeah, having good systems in place, that key things happen, especially at the operational level, are important. Small businesses, there's a cost analysis that you have to go through. If I put in these systems and this is what it's going to cost me to maintain these systems, what does that actually translate into revenues and profitability, next month, the month after that, the month after that. And so some things just don't make sense for a smaller business to implement, because the benefits do not outweigh the costs that you incur to be able to put that in place. So, small businesses typically run very lean teams. The accounting team is usually, an accountant or a bookkeeper and maybe an accounts payable person, and that's about it. And so as businesses grow, that doesn't cut it. You need to add more people to that. And I've seen, first-hand experience as a consultant and within businesses myself, is that growth itself sucks out way more cash than what you think it does, out of the business, moving forward, because you need to make a lot of investments up front and then the benefits or the revenues and profitability comes a little bit later, and there's a lag there. And in between that, I found clients having, making so much more money on the top line, yet having so much less money on the bottom line and even less money in the bank account. And they kind of go, well, if we just not had grown, we would have been better off. So those systems, etc., are important, but they need to be put in place in a measured way, with the right capital behind it to be able to support that growth. Otherwise, you can actually just kill a company, and even though it's very successful and profitable, you can kill a company as you systematize and hire people for that growth, for that big picture down the road. You can't kill it now because you haven't got the right capital behind you to be able to effectively implement that plan.
Well, it's been good here, Mr. Powers. It's a great, insightful podcast we just shot today, and our whole thought today was about helping you guys out there understand the financial complexities of an M&A transaction, but also some real life scenarios from individuals just like Owen here, who has gone through different transactions. And I didn't know that about you as far as the turnaround, and then the company was not doing as well as they thought it was, and of course hence bringing you on and then flipping it into probably millions of dollars extra. I don't know the size of it, but regardless, you turned it around and then was able to make a nice exit. And then from there, now you're helping companies go through the entire process. So we just want to say thank you so much for joining us today, on the Acquisition IQ podcast. And if you guys are interested as well, we have the Acquisition IQ Network. It's growing fast across the nation. It's our private paid community for individuals that are wanting to learn through subject matter experts within the M&A space. We also have our big conference coming to Salt Lake City on September 3rd. We're excited about that. Already talking about it. And we would like to join you to, one, like this video, share it with somebody else in the entrepreneurial space. And then also, Owen, how do we get a hold of you if we want to be able to do some business with you?
Probably I'm on LinkedIn, so folks can look there, but Owen at powercfo.cpa is my email address.
That's really easy. We'll put that on the video as well, but if you guys like today's episode, please share it with others, as well as comment on the video below on who you want to see next. So thank you so much. We'll talk to you again soon.